Hey, what's going on, guys? Kalamazi here, and today I want to talk to you guys about 9.1 PTR. It's pretty funny that I made a video about 3 or 4 days ago talking about how PTR might be out in 2, 3, 4-ish weeks, and quite literally the next morning Blizzard drops a blue post saying, hey, PTR is coming out within a couple weeks, so heads up. With that being said, I want to talk a bit today about legendaries, conduits, and potential abilities, I guess abilities, traits, talents, whatever, what have you, set bonuses from previous expansions that we very well might see making a return in patch 9.1. Now, they haven't mentioned at this point there's going to be new legendaries for any class or spec or anything, but I think we can assume that there's probably going to be 1 or 2 per class. And on top of that, I would assume there's probably going to be a handful of new conduits as well, just looking at how things are probably going to be paced out over the course of the expansion. We also know that a lot of the I get a lot of legendaries this time were influenced, even conduits, from previous expansions, some of them being copied directly from Legion, some having similar effects to legendaries we've seen in the past. And also, hey, we have a Wrath of Consumption. That was an actual artifact trait ability. So I want to take a look back, some old tier bonuses, legendaries, everything, and talk about some that I think could make a return and synergies, interactions between them. Now, it is PTR. Talent changes, like new talents being moved around row wise, doesn't really happen as much as it does in alpha or beta, but we have seen that happen in the past. Looking back to Legion, we had Death's Embrace added it basically in the final patch as a Warlock execute and then removed in the patch after. So fingers crossed that does happen, because there are a couple abilities, talents probably for each spec, that could use a few changes. Any weak ORs, profiles, or add-ons you see here, feel free to swing by my Twitch where you can grab them for free, hang out at any time. I will have links to the actual page you see here for like the tier bonuses, the artifact talent calculators down below in the video description if you want to check that out. And also a quick shout out to all my patrons. Thank you so much for the support. Heads up, I will indeed be creating a 9.1 Warlock document spreadsheet like I did in 9.0. The tier 3 Felgar rank or higher of my Patreon gets earlier access to that if you guys want to, I guess, grab that ahead of time. So thank you again for the support, guys. Feel free to leave any questions down below, and I'll be sure to get back to you. Let's start off talking about, let's start off in Legion territory. So as I mentioned, some legendaries we've seen in Shadowlands have been taken directly from Legion. Wilfred's is a great example. Demonic Synergy is sort of like one. It was a Mr. Pandaria WAD talent, I believe, actual talent for Warlocks to turn into a legendary, but nonetheless, oh, Pillars of the Dark Portal here as well. Perfect, there you go. I want to go over the Warlock Legion legendaries and talk a bit about how they could be impactful, and then get into the actual artifact abilities here too. We have Pillars already. Pillars, it's an awesome ability. It actually knocks your enemies up that are in between the 2 portals whenever you cast it now. It's fine. Didn't see a crazy amount of play in Legion. When it did, it was more or less due to gear swapping and Mythic Plus and things, or some niche, I guess, movement utility people needed on certain raid fights. The big one here that I actually want to talk about the most is Soul of the Netherlord. Now, this was introduced, I believe, in 8.3. Every class got a universal legendary of, I guess, ring. I think they were all rings, right, of sorts, that gave you a talent for each spec. Affliction was Death's Embrace, which is no longer here anymore, unfortunately. One of the best talents that AF ever had, I feel, was a blast to play. Demonology has Grimoire of Synergy, and Destruction had Eradication. Now, Demo might have been something different. I think this was initially, maybe when they were first testing it, something different, but at this point it indicates that it was Synergy here. Now, I think this would actually be a great legendary to add if they're only adding 1 per class in 9.1, giving access to different talents, whether it be like, Demonology having access to both Grimoire and Soul Conduit, or both Soul Strike and Vile Fiend, or even Demonic Strength and Bombers. One of many things opens up so many doors for different synergies, just different builds. It makes things so much more just intricate, but in a good way. Exciting. You're able to actually play 2 abilities together. It changes the rotations, changes the way you approach fights. Demonology has a very good stacked single target cleave profile. Playing whether it's Demonic Strength, Dreadlash, or Bombers. If you had access to both these, for example, incredible. Grimoire, Felguard, and Soul Conduit, even Inner Demons. Now, let's be real here, you're not going to get another portal or consumption. This row is this row's a disaster in itself. But whether you're playing any spec, once again, Destro still has Eradication. You can just make it have Eradication again. And while, I mean, hey, it might not be the most fun talent to play with, having this and Backdraft would make a pretty big difference. Because you're not picking between, like, you're not trying to decide between Roaring Blaze Synergy or Eradication, simming technically a tiny bit higher. And a legendary like this would be sick. I'd love it. I think, well, honestly, I think everybody would love it. It'd be really cool. Moving on, the Master Harvester. So Dark Soul or Soul Harvest is gone. You can make a comparison to Dark Soul here, but the problem is it's not baseline. Soul Harvest was baseline, so as cool as this is, probably it's not going to happen. They're not going to make a legendary that requires you to take a talent to be relevant, as cool as it is. Sacrilege, Dark Strike, already around. Corruption Slow, perfect. Legendress, unfortunately, you can't really make good use of because UA is capped on one target, not your soul shard spender, so it would be generating a shard, but it was very, very different back in Legion, not the way that it is now. So unfortunately, Legendress really wouldn't work out. Sleepless Shackles, geez, I can't even say that 3 times fast. This sort of, it would work out, I suppose. It's sort of like a mini contagion, but I mean, it's each enemy. And the fact that you can't spread UA again, unless you're in arenas, really doesn't hold a lot of relevancy here. So Eternal Disdain basically makes your agony have 10% less duration, deals damage faster. It's relevant. I think it could be a thing. I don't think it's incredibly impactful. Now, I think it's sort of stronger than it seems because it's faster shard gen, it's more shard gen, more damage being dealt faster. But the thing is, it might mess with rapture windows and timing a little bit too. So it's a possibility, but nonetheless, this feels like, honestly, it could be a conduit over a legendary, a new talent, but we already have Creeping Death. So Hood more or less feels like it could be a conduit. When you see conduits, they're typically tied into one ability. It's not like a conduit has Racking Brilliance on it, for example, where like every time you generate a soul shard, you get an intellect proc. It's typically like Havoc does this, Unstable Affliction does this, Rapture deals more damage, Chaos Bolt Incinerate hit harder for Ashen Remains. So I think this could be a pretty good conduit option, being honest. And there might be some awkward interactions with Rolling Agony. There also might be a bit of a, hey, Rolling Agony is already like your agony based conduit, but there could be some synergy here. It'd be nice to see. Reap won't work, unfortunately. Kazakh Final Curse Doom is gone. Wilfred's is already legendary. Recurrent Ritual is one that I was actually surprised didn't return. However, they changed Demonic Calling to now make your dogs free, essentially, and have no cast time, same as before. But the big thing with this, if you play Demonic Calling with Soul Conduit, you still have the chance of getting a refund from Soul Conduit, because it checks to see like the initial spending of shards for the ability, which is 2 before the override comes in. So you still have a chance to generate shards off this with Soul Conduit. But honestly, I thought Recurrent Ritual would be one of the legendaries they brought around. This ability feels impactful. It feels strong enough. Now, you don't have the crazy tier bonus synergy with like Dreadstalkers being reset on Shadowbolt cast or a chance to do it, but it's still strong. I wouldn't mind seeing Recurrent come back. It was one of the most best legendaries. Now, they might be a little stronger, I guess, now compared to Legion, but still, Recurrent's like iconic. It's one of the big ones. I'd love to see Recurrent come back. And I think it's strong enough to be a legendary on its own versus Hood maybe being more of a conduit kind of ability. Now, Sindori Spite. I loved Sindori Spite, and it says Demonology, but this was a universal legendary because you had Doomguard, you had Infernal. I think this could be brought back for just Dark Lair, Infernal, and Tyrant. The problem is that they probably have to tune this a little bit with Demonology because, I mean, 25 seconds, like, that's essentially half, your Tyrant's a minute, basically, at this point, if you're playing Wilfred's. They probably have to tune this to be, like, for the next 10 seconds, or 15 after Demo, because you're going to carry that damage amp into your decon window and everything else, too. So there's a lot of tuning with Sindori Spite, but it would be really cool to see this return or have some kind of universal legendary around. I'm not even getting into the pre-combat summon Doomguard Infernal like legendary swapping cheese that we have, but still, it would be really cool to see a return of Sindori Spite in some form. Awakener's Loyalty, you can't make a comparison here to Decon. Like, yes, Thou-Cast Consumption is basically demonic consumption now. There's no way they're buffing anything around Decon's power amp. It's too strong as it is. You can bring back this, but it's very similar to Roaring Blaze, and they've already had issues with tuning Roaring Blaze and Rain of Fire. They actually removed Rain of Fire from Roaring Blaze's damage amp, like whitelist, blacklist kind of thing, so I don't think it's probably going to be making a return. Shaw, quite literally legendary we have now. Territory of Souls you can make a case for, but you already have the Incinerate legendary that deals 100% or generates more shards. Probably just not very likely. A bit of actual overlap there. A big one, Magic Strike Restraints. These were actually pretty good on cleave based fights. Plus, if you work this in Time Walking right now, you actually get the old Chaos Bolt animation, which is, in my opinion, a little superior to the one we have now, you know, but this would actually be really good. There's a chance these will be played in Mythic Plus. There's a decent chance these will be played on fights like Huntsman Baltimore, or a fight where Destra was good. Magic Strike Restraints are solid, and I think personally one of the most fun underrated legendaries from Legion. Desher was good, Af was really good in Legion too, so I think Magistrate Restraints sort of got overlooked, but I would love a world where Magistrate Restraints actually end up coming back. So TLDR, Restraints, big for Destro, would love to see him. Sindora Spite, great universal legendary, can work very well right now with every spec's main cooldown. You actually have a Hood of Eternal Disdain, I think more of a conduit, but it definitely, it could work. Recurrent is, I think, good enough to be legendary on its own, especially with the Demonic Calling synergy. Basically, this turns Demonic Calling into a shard generator whenever it procs. Could be really, really strong. I already have Sacrolash, so Thundrisk doesn't work. Harvester, unfortunately, a talent now. And once again, if Soul of the X for every class came back, I think this would make gameplay feel so much better. I guess it depends on the talent, to be fair. But I love playing with Soul of the Lord. It made every spec feel just more in-depth, more exciting. Let's talk a little bit about actual artifact weapon traits. Because, hey, Wrath of Consumption already made a comeback. At this point, why not bring back Soul Flame? Sorry for the flashbang here, boys. Unfortunately, I can't really make the screen a lighter color here without every trait disappearing. Regardless, so starting off with Af here, we do know that, well, okay. So Wrath of Consumption is legendary now. It was buffed in 9.0.5, and the effect is actually really strong. The actual damage it deals here, the duration is shorter here, and the damage that it deals is less here. But it's different. This version of Wrath just says after you kill a target. The current version of Af on retail has to have Corruption or Agony applied to get the actual effect. They both stack to 5 times. The damage amp is 1% here. It used to be 2 in Legion, and they nerfed it. It was 2 OP. But keep in mind, you had Reap Souls, which would double the effect of every ability on your weapon. So basically, this is 2% too. Similar, but different. Still a very strong effect. As far as things go for Af, there's a lot of abilities here like corruption damage increase. You've got shadowy incantations. You've got crystalline shadows. You've got some things here, but most of them just like increase your damage of X, increase this of X. And these traits are fine. You can probably make a case for most of these to be applied like a conduit. One being here, when UA expires, it has a 6% chance to reapply itself. This actually sounds pretty interesting and sort of spicy, but the thing is, this is when UA was different. You could stack UA, it was your spender. It's different now. UA shouldn't be expiring. You should refresh it in your pandemic window. So there's that. Plus, hey, it doesn't really stack, and there's also that it's just sort of a nightmare on its own. But when you start looking at abilities, for example, like drain soul damage here, this is tied into like Ren Soul, getting an extra tormented soul, but like the gold abilities here, like this, sort of like Harvester of Souls. Once again, I mean, each time corruption deals damage, it has a 15% chance to deal shadow damage to the target and heal you for all the damage dealt. Not incredibly impactful. Feels sort of like a conduit if they can nerf it a bit. But there are 2 big ones here. One being, okay, obviously Soul Flame. Everybody loves Soul Flame. I think people sort of misunderstood how good and how bad Soul Flame was in certain spots. This ability, I wish I had a clip like Swarperon tanking in the whole strat, because yeah, everybody in the raid tanked to 1 FPS, but Soul Flame carried that fight. Didn't even matter. When you kill a target, its soul bursts into flames, dealing X shadow damage, shadow flame damage, I'm sorry, to all nearby enemies. Now, thinking of the pools in like Darkheart Thicket, right? The blood pools. Thinking of the first slimes in Archway, I think. Yeah. When one target died and the others were low on health and it AoE'd onto one, the damage just like it just spread. One dies, then 2 die, then they all die. They all blow up. This is a huge part of like Warlock, of the padding-esque. This is a big part of like Af's flashy burst damage in a sense, which is odd because it's Af, but on certain packs, Soul Flame just dealt so much damage. I think going back to Soul Flame territory is a bit dangerous, but this, I could see this hands down being legendary. Maybe when you play Mythic Plus, trying to think of certain dungeons now, something maybe along the lines of like a Halls of Atonement or larger pulls like the Chicken Wing in DOS, you could get a lot of value out of Soul Flame. But the question is, how relevant is the damage that Soul Flame actually deals? It's relevant, but those ads are probably going to die on their own fast enough, well enough to the point where it's not necessarily needed. But then again, things die faster, you time keys faster. So there's a huge debate. There could be a huge debate on if Soul Flame is relevant, if it should come back. That could be a video on its own. But I think Soul Flame is one trait that definitely stands out as one that could be legendary from the Affliction Uthlesh tree. The other one is actually right here, Compounding Horror. Each time Agony and Corruption deal damage, they have a 10% chance to cause your next Unstable Affliction to instantly deal X shadow damage, stacking up to 5 times. Now, obviously, I mean, this could technically work for Unstable Affliction, right? They could just have the next tick of UA deal more damage, but I don't really know if that's impactful enough. The big thing here, UA is not our shard spender anymore. We have Rapture. If they change Compounding Horror to increase the damage of your next Rapture, that might be, well, pretty strong. Keep in mind that Rapture is both a single target ability and an AoE ability. Trying to spread Agony and Corruption Mythic Plus takes a bit of time, but there's that small like window where you have to decide in these large polls how many Agonies you want to roll. I mean, Corruption's pretty easy with Seed, but you have to decide. So at a certain point, okay, if we're in like a 10 mob poll, I spread 5 Agonies, and then I go into my Raptures and stuff. But this might encourage people to roll a few more Agonies to a larger Rapture buff, stacking up to 5 times, depending on the proc rate and things. Like Compounding Horror, I could see very easily put on a Legendary. Depending on the tuning, it might even be worthwhile in single target, but AoE-wise, this thing could actually stack a pretty good bit, and I think it would help a little bit with AF's Toolkit and Mythic Plus. I think AF is a bit underrated in Plus in the first place. We're not meta. We're not insane, the best class in the world. I think our damage is stronger than people think it is, especially playing the Siphon Life build. But Compounding Horror on a Legendary could actually be relevant. I think it quite possibly would see play. It's sort of like there's a bit of RNG to it, but not as much RNG as Synergy. And more Agonies you have spread, the more Corruptions you have active, the faster this thing can stack. One of the worst feelings in the world is opening up with like the 6 shard, 7 shard Rapture opener and getting no Synergy proc. Getting it towards the very end of your window. There's RNG tied to this, but in 3, 4, 5 target settings, when you have 10 dots rolling that all affect this, Compounding Horror can stack pretty fast. I think both this and Soul Flame could be a pretty good option as far as Legendaries are concerned. Moving on, Demo. Demonology. Demo's in a weird spot right now. So you have the crazy stamina scaling build, which you talked about. There are mixed reviews in that build for what it's worth. It's very good. People don't believe me. It's fine. You'll see it next year as long as they don't get nerfed, which is probably going to. As far as Demo is concerned, a lot of things revolved around Thalkael and Demonic Empowerment in Legion. Like Thalkael's Ascendance, this trait literally ruined Demonology in Legion for what it's worth. It destroyed this spec in a bad way. It was terrible. But there are some that, like Dreadbite, increases the damage of your Wild Imp's Firebolt for 10 seconds. This, I think, could quite easily be a Conduit. Now, your damage is doesn't really revolve around Wild Imp damage anymore. I remember back to Legion when Demo was strong on certain Patrick bosses, trying to stack Infernal Furnace as much as we could. And Jaws of Shadows did that as well. It helped Jaws of Shadow, I guess. This could be a Conduit. There's a lot of things you can say. Conduit, sure. I guess technically we already have this in Fel Commando, depending which pet you're playing. But a lot of them, once again, like AF, just flat damage increase, flat crit increase, UR, buff, whatever, what have you. But you have an interesting ability here, the Expendables. When your Wild Imps expire or die, typically when they expire or are imploded, your demons are inspired and gain 1% additional damage, stacking up to 10 times. So this essentially means that you can have, depending how often you're summoning imps, you can just roll a 10% damage buff a good bit of the time. This almost feels like it could be a Conduit. It sort of reminds me of Tyrant Soul a little bit. It doesn't really feel strong enough to be a Legendary, because depending on the uptime and how fast your imps are expiring and your haste levels and things, you might not be able to maintain as high of a uptime as you want. But this feels like it could definitely be a Conduit in 9.1. I don't think it will be too OP. It's a bit of a damage increase in Demonology. Most of Demo's damage does come from your pets, but you're not going to maintain that 10 stack the entire time. I would assume not. So this does feel similar to Tyrant Soul. I think you can roll this though as a Conduit. I definitely do. But as far as the rest of the Demo abilities go, like Legion Wrath, Demon Wrath's gone. Doom is not baseline anymore. Hand of Gul'dan damage, sure, this is fine. Dirty Hands, I like it. You can increase Hand of Gul'dan damage a bit, but for the most part, as far as the other gold traits go, once again, Thalkael, once again, this is okay. Whenever your imps cast Firebolt, you gain a stack of Stolen Power. 100 stacks, your next Shadowbolt deals 100% more damage. Your imps cast faster than you think, so it doesn't take as long to reach this. I don't think this is strong enough to really be a Conduit. It probably is, but I don't want it to be. I don't think it's strong enough. I don't think it's good enough. And once again, this is Thalkael stuff with Shadowbolt and Demon Wrath. As far as Demo's concerned, though, I think the Expendables could quite easily make a comeback in 9.1 Conduit-wise. I think it's strong enough to do so. Destruction. I'm going to say right now, I get it. Dimensional Rifts, I get it. I get it. I know. Dimensional Rift is definitely strong enough to be a legendary. The thing with Dimensional Rift is that legendaries don't typically introduce new abilities. They buff abilities or buff interactions. I can't really think of an ability or a legendary that brings a new ability with it, and that would be Dimensional Rift. They're not going to add Rift back to the game passively. Plus, Rift is tied to your Scepter of Sargeras. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense that your Warlock on his own can rip a hole in time and space. It sort of does, I guess, because hey, at this point, who knows what we're even doing in the Shadowlands. But being real though, once we move past Dimensional Rift, hopefully maybe one day making its triumphant return, there are a couple abilities that I think are really strong from the Scepter of Sargeras that I think could see play as legendaries or maybe as conduits. Number one, Lord of Flames. I think this is strong enough where it probably would have to be tied to a legendary. But then again, the 10-minute like cooldown on it maybe could be conduit based. Once every 10 minutes, summon Infernal will summon 3 additional Infernals to serve you for 25 seconds. Now, there's a lot of synergy here with Reign of Chaos. 4 Infernals means 4 times the shard gen. Even if they nerf like the full shard gen from the smaller ones to partial, you'd still get a lot of extra stuff. So Reign of Chaos would get utterly insane. I assume that's why it's probably have to be a legendary, not a conduit, although you could maybe make a case for both. Either way, this ability was so much fun to play with in Legion. It was sort of iconic, even though it only lasted for, well, 1 expansion. It felt really good dropping your Infernal on a huge trash pack. Lord of Flames procs or is active. You just destroy everything and move on. It sort of feels like Reign of Chaos. And stacking this with Reign of Chaos, well, there's some chaos pun in there somewhere. But this could definitely come back, whether it be a legendary or conduit. I think it's very strong. Conflagration of Chaos. So Conflagrate has a 50% chance to guarantee your next Conflagrate critically strikes, and to increase its damage by your critical strike chance. So this could very well be a conduit. I don't necessarily think it's strong enough to be a legendary. There's synergy here with Roaring Blaze though. On beta, before we had like Cinders made and things, there was a debate: do you want to clip your Roaring Blaze when it's falling with Conflagrate? Because you refresh it with Conflagrate, and if you clip it, you get the bonus damage to that second Conflagrate, if you're following me here, versus not if you just, you know, Conflagrate after it expires, but you get a bit of a longer of a Roaring Blaze uptime. Now with Cinders being a thing, if this became a conduit, your Conflagrate, there's so many Conflagrate conduit words in here, man. I don't know, I'm sure I'm confusing you guys. This would be insane. It'd be really, it'd be cool, it'd be exciting with Roaring Blaze. I think it would play pretty well into the build too. It's not going to make it like incredibly OP, I don't think, and I don't feel, but having this back as a conduit, Conflagrate doesn't have anything as far as Destro's concerned. All you really have, I mean, you have your Ashen Remains one, which is like your set it and forget it, you know, focus malignancy conduit. That's Chaos Bolt Incinerate. You have, I guess you have Combusting Engine. This thing's miserable. This promotes like the worst gameplay, the most frustrating, aggravating, annoying gameplay possible. I want this removed at all costs, but I mean, I think they can make a case for the actual return of Conflagration of Chaos regardless. The third ability here, and this one comes from the later on Legion tree. Cry Havoc. When Chaos Bolt deals damages a target afflicted by Havoc, it explodes, dealing X damage to enemies within 8 yards. So this is an interesting one. Once again, there's some overlap here with Rolling Havoc being a conduit. I don't know if this is too strong to not be a legendary, because in Mythic Plus, you Havoc a lot. And when you're playing Destro in the right setting, you're basically Havocing most of the time when it's off cooldown. You're going back into it. The thing with this, it's Chaos Bolt. It's not like Incinerate or Conflagrate or Immolate. It has to be Chaos Bolt. But the Chaos Bolt damage will splash onto enemies. Depending on the tuning of this could really boost Destro's, I guess, stacked AoE damage a bit, which is not, it has a good profile for it when your Infernal's down, when you have your Cataclysm up and things, or if you're playing Channel Demon Fire. But outside of that, I think Cry Havoc could really bridge that gap. There's a case to making it both a conduit and a legendary. I don't know if it's too strong to not be a conduit or if it's too weak to not be a legendary, but the effect is really unique. It's sort of similar to Rolling Havoc, you know, but the problem is when you mess with Havoc based abilities, they're sketchy, because if things are OP, Destro just destroys. Look at Flashpoint rolling at the end of BFA. Destro just cranked everything. A lot of that was due to Flashpoint, but also a lot of that was due to rolling havoc. But the cool thing is that this doesn't really translate from like huge havoc windows into a burst of single target damage. This is just straight up, hey, we're havocing, we can cleave on other mobs. I think it's pretty solid. It could actually be a thing. Destro, Demo, Af, all three trees have a lot of interesting abilities. We've even seen some, once again, already in Shadowlands. Who's to say Soul Flame? It's not next. I think it's also important to look past just Legion legendaries and artifact traits, because there were a lot of really powerful abilities. I'm playing Inner Demons here, that's why this is going off. There's a lot of really powerful abilities that were in BFA as well. A lot of them are Azerite traits, but that's not really a bad thing. Flashpoint, Rolling Havoc, they were incredibly strong early on when it came to Destro, and even later on in the expansion, things were really strong when it came to Nilotha, partially because there are a lot of fights you could take advantage of Flashpoint on, but the Rolling Havoc value, being able to hit 2 targets, stack your Havoc intellect buff, and then swap back single target, whether it's ad spawning or just a permanent 2 target fight, and turn that into a huge single target damage bonus, was incredibly strong when paired with Supremacy, when paired with what's it called, Dark Soul. It was incredibly strong. Starting it off here, Chaos Shards, Incinerate damage increased by X, and when you fill a shard, you have a small chance to generate an additional shard over 2 seconds. Chaos Shards is fine. I could see this sort of being like a conduit. I don't think it's too strong. I wouldn't want this on a legendary. It's not strong enough. Bursting Flare is sort of similar to another conflict rate ability. I don't want to tie too many things, or wouldn't want to, into conflict rate as far as Destro is concerned, because I mean, this does stack. Once again, you're trying to play with Roaring Blaze. I don't know how good of a candidate Bursting Flare actually is. Chaos Charge is fine. I wouldn't hate seeing it as a conduit, but once again, you already have Ashen Remains time to incinerate. So Chaotic Inferno, this is a cool one. Chaos Bolt damage increase, which is sort of Ashen Remains, but it gives you a small chance to make your next Incinerate instant cast, which mobility is something that Destro can use. I mean, even over the course of Alpha and Beta, we were asking for like a return of Searing Pain, like an iconic ability, because that's what Shadowlands was about. We get Corruption. Great. No Warlock can place Destro or Demos on a cast Corruption the entire expansion. That was really good. We were asking for Searing Pain to come back and have it be castable on the move, like Scorch, like, you know, one of 8,000 abilities other classes have in the move. Lock, or Destro Lock can really only conflict rate, unless you're casting a Rain of Fire. So it would be a nice trait to have back, maybe a bit of a quality of life increase, but the bigger thing here is that Chaos Bolt still hits like a wet noodle. I think this could very well be a conduit. I mean, we've seen Tyrants, or we've seen Supreme Commander become Tyrant Soul. That's basically the exact same thing. I think Chaotic Inferno is a very good candidate for a conduit for Destro in 9.1. The big ones here, though, we're not getting Crashing. Sorry, just hate to say it, boys, we're not getting Crashing. We're not getting more Infernal Reduction. It's not happening. The big two, Flashpoint, Rolling Havoc. Even saying those two words together still makes me cringe a bit. It hasn't been long enough. I still have the Nilotha scars, but either way, the flashbacks, man. You can't deny the power of Flashpoint and Rolling Havoc paired together, even separate. There are so many fights where you can take advantage of Flashpoint. Whenever your Immolate deals damage to a target above 80% health, you gain X haste for 10 seconds. Now, with stat DRs and things, they might want to leave this as like a passive, or like an actual raw value gain, like 328 versus the percent, because percents won't DR, but like 328 haste will DR at a certain point. Either way, this is such a strong ability. It probably have to be a legendary. I think it's too strong for a conduit, unless they nerfed the haste bonus you get by a crazy amount. What I would really like to see though is Flashpoint. And once again, this is a bit of a reach here. I'd like to see Flashpoint return as a talent. We have Inevitable Demise for Affliction, which we'll get to in a little bit here. Why not Flashpoint? And look at these rows, like dead talent, essentially dead talent. Nobody plays with them. Dead talent. Why not? You even Soul Conduit, like it's playable, but there are so many dead abilities. You can make a case for Flashover being, or Flashpoint being in technically either of these rows, because both Flashover and Reverse sort of give you a haste buff. I would love to see, first of all, I hate Internal Combustion. I'd love to see this removed from the game. Flashpoint here. At the same time, you can make a case for moving Shadowburn, putting a baseline, giving us Flashpoint back. Just remove Soulfire, which they probably won't do because they love it. Kicks extra damage. There you go. Putting Flashpoint here. Even on this row though, Fire and Brimstone is just a disaster the way that it is. It needs a pretty big buff, a tuning pass, or it's just going to be sort of there. I think a good candidate though is the 45 row. You've got your large, like huge AoE profile in Reign of Chaos. You've got your single target Roaring Blaze profile, or maybe your 2-target like Roaring Blaze profile, because you can make it work with Havoc most of the time. Grimoire of Sacrifice is a disaster. This thing needs to go. I don't know why it's still here. Like, it's just utterly terrible. Putting Flashpoint here wouldn't even be a terrible idea. But Flashpoint's a very strong ability, and it's one of the things that made Destro feel really, really strong. It made it powerful in Nilotha. With tuning and without Expedient and crazy corruption stacking around, Flashpoint was good. Looking back to BOD, looking back to whatever came after BOD, Eternal Palace, it was good. But locks weren't utterly destroying everything in their path. That's when Expedient came out. But Flashpoint was still played. Flashpoint was still good. It's too strong for a conduit, but I'd love to see it on a legendary or, well, a talent return would be my #1 choice here. Rolling Havoc to a similar extent. I think you can also make a case for Rolling Havoc maybe on the same row here as a talent. It has to be a talent or a legendary. It's too strong to be a conduit. Plus you already have, I don't know, what is this thing called again? The Havoc one? Duplicitous Havoc. So you can't really have Rolling and Duplicitous. And it's sort of, I guess it's, they're not really similar. But either way, Rolling Havoc, I think both Flashpoint, but really Rolling, raised the skill ceiling of Destro a good bit. There were a lot of like micromanagement choices you had to make for Rolling Havoc. When do I want to Havoc here, there? Do I want to pop Havoc at the start of my Infernal? Do I want to pop it later on? Or do I pop it on pull so I can carry the intellect buff into my Dark Soul, into my Greater Supremacy stacks? What do I want to do here? Having Rolling back on a legendary, I think it'd be solid. It's strong enough to be a legendary on its own. It would probably see play at this point, looking at all of Destro's legendaries. It would probably see play, honestly, in almost every fight. It's better than Odir. I mean, it'd be that or Cinders. I would assume. Synergy's fine, Madness is fine, but it'd be that or Cinders. But looking at a 2-target like Havoc fight, I don't see how you don't play Rolling Havoc on a legendary. It would be really strong, but I don't think it would be too strong without the Flashpoint interaction being there too, because you're not dumping 10 Chaos Bolts into one window. You're probably getting 3 to 4 off with just Havoc being extended by 2 seconds in Legion or in Shadowlands, but still, Rolling Havoc would be awesome to come back. Legendary or talent, depending where you want to put it. At this point, honestly, put it anywhere. Flashpoint Rolling, I'm down. Bring him back. Moving on. Affliction. Pandemic Invocation. I don't want to read it. I don't want it. Terrible ability. Cascading Calamity. Casting UA on a target affected by your UA increases your haste to 15. So this is already gone because UA stacking is unfortunately no longer a thing in Shadowlands. This did work in pre-patch though. You had to just sort of clip your UAs, but it worked out okay. Dreadful Calling is very similar to Corrupting Leer at this point already. So I don't really think you're going to, honestly, this sort of is Corrupting Leer just for Rapture and things that just Agony instead. So I don't think you're getting any of these back. ID is a talent, which perfect example. Why can't Flashpoint and Rolling be a talent? It would make Destro feel infinitely better and probably shore it up in a lot of areas it needs a bit of help in. I wish they move ID in this row for what it's worth. There's too much overlap, I guess. You have Nightfall. Nightfall was changed on beta to now scale with corruption being on multiple targets. You get more procs. It starts to DR at a certain point, but you have a lot of overlap. You want it in multiple targets. Drain Soul is single target based, but you also want it in a setting where a lot of targets are dying because a soul shard sniping. So I'd love to see ID move to a different row, but maybe like here-ish, somewhere else. I don't know. Anywhere in this row, but this row. Just miserable. Either way, already here, probably not going to happen. Sudden Onset, interesting. I wouldn't mind some kind of agony increase on a conduit damage-wise. We already talked about the legendary. We already mentioned, what's it called again? We already mentioned this, Hood of Eternal Disdain. I think this is more likely to come back on a conduit, but regardless, they merged this into Writhen Agony. Writhen Agony itself now starts at 4 stacks, and they increased the stack count from 15 to 18, so I don't really think you're going to see Sudden Onset around anymore. They've basically all been turned into talent at this point. Deathbloom. Seed needs more help than Deathbloom. What, this is an old ability, right? Deathbloom? I don't know what that is. The one I want to mention here, though, is Racking Brilliance. I think Racking is strong, but not strong enough to be on a legendary. This could be a conduit because, I mean, technically you can say this is like an agony conduit and you already have rolling agony, but you could make this a universal conduit as well. At a certain point, you're probably going to see overlap with conduits affecting 2 abilities at once. Racking Brilliance is a great candidate for that, I feel. It could be an actual talent on its own, but I think it's a better option as a conduit. Every other shard your agony generates also increases your int by X for 6 seconds. It was it's not like you're going to like abuse this ability. It was good over the course of BFA, basically your best ability, but it wasn't crazy OP. And on certain fights where you wanted like ID, okay, you'd stack ID with racking. Otherwise you'd stack racking with SO or racking with cascading. It's a solid all-around ability, and you sort of have that in Focus Malignancy now. But I would assume we're probably getting a third potency conduit, maybe a little baseless speculation there in 9.1. Either way, I think racking can make a return. I don't think it's strong enough to be a legendary, and maybe a talent, but the question is, where do you put it? I mean, all these abilities are fine, what they do. So I'd love a conduit for racking brilliance. Now, I'll admit, I actually debated leaving Demonology out, not because it's too OP right now, really just because most of the abilities are actually already in game. EP, legendary. Baleful, baked into your Tyrant. Supreme Commander, Tyrant Soul. Demonic Meteor. Demonic Meteor, I think, is too close to Horn Nightmare legendary. They sort of do the same thing, giving you a shard back, more shards, more imps. There's no direct increase to like Demonic Meteor's damage, which did hold a bit of relevancy. And plus, you play one meteor trait both for the shards and also the Hand of Gul'dan splash damage. I wouldn't mind seeing some version of that come back. Maybe even baking that into the legendary might actually make it like the best choice depending on timing. But let's be real here. Having a Minute Tyrant with Decon is incredibly strong. Shadow's Bite and Umbral Blaze. Unfortunately, I just don't think they're strong enough. Even when like the expansion was towards the very end, BFA that is, you really didn't see Shadow's Bite played at any point unless it was like, I think Uldir was played a tiny bit. A Demon Bolt damage increase, we already have like 10 sources of this. You have Necrolord, ability, you have Balespire's Burning Core, you have Sack Souls, you have Dreadlash, you have Inner Demons with Sack Souls, and honestly, Power Siphon, all these abilities combined, Demon Bolt still sucks. It doesn't do any damage. Like playing the big Demon Bolt build, first of all, is a literal nightmare. It's so hard to micromanage. The hardest spec I've ever played in game, hands down. And number two, Decon just infinitely better. It does no damage. The amount of work you have to do to micromanage every little thing optimally, it's nowhere near. It's not rewarding. It's terrible gameplay. So Shadow's Bite, not really a big contender for me. Umbral Blaze, once again, you probably could tie this to a conduit, because Hand of Gul'dan, I mean, honestly, you can't really make a case for it. Demonology has 4 conduits, being Tyrant Soul, Supreme Commander, Fel Commando, Carnivorous Stalkers, and Born of Blood. Now, Hand of Gul'dan is tied directly to Born, but I wouldn't hate having some kind of Hand of Gul'dan damage increase. This has been talked about a lot on stream, having Umbra Blaze back for a bit of a dot, maybe a single target damage increase a little bit. I don't think it would bridge the gap and help shore up Demonology enough outside of decon windows. I wouldn't hate it, and chances are high it probably wouldn't even be played conduit wise over like Fel Commando or Carnivorous or Born of Blood. Born of Blood is just an insane conduit and smooths out Demonology's rotation so much. But either way, I think it holds more relevancy than Shadow's Bite. Forbidden Knowledge just had Call Dreadtalkers make your next Demon Bolt deal more damage. Once again, Demon Bolt damage, just whatever. And look here, Exorcerate, same thing. Demon Bolt damage. I don't think Demo's in a bad spot right now. I just don't know what to do with it. It's probably the most OP spec in the game when you have PI and stamina scaling effects, because no other spec in the game scales with stamina. The problem is that you can't really touch any kind of pet modifiers that work with decon, because then decon's even more OP than it already is. And if you do, it just leads to Demonology being even more degenerate. Wait till next tier when you see like 4 or 5 Demonology locks being played on a Patchwork boss. If we make it next tier, there's a big DPS check. It very well might happen. But as far as abilities go for Azerite traits, they're either like already in-game, or just not really as relevant or worthwhile as Destro and Af's options. I also thought it would be worth mentioning a couple of tier bonuses. Now, it took me about half an hour to find a website that showed every single Warlock tier bonus together, but I finally did. The first one here is actually big. So Shadow's Embrace is a very hot topic when it comes to 9.1. Nobody wants it around anymore. It's just a miserable ability to play with in 2 target, 3 target, and even single target. It's just it's not fun to maintain. I think if SE was gone, Shadow's Embrace, AF would actually feel a lot better. The question is though, how do you remove it if you do? And what do you do with Cold Embrace, the conduit? Right there. Done. Right there. Each time Drain Life or Drain Soul deals damage, it has a 10% chance to make your next Unstable Affliction, Rapture, not consume a soul shard. Now, you'd probably have to nerf the proc rate on this. A 10% chance is probably pretty high, looking at what Rapture can do in single target, really in AoE, but even in single target, this is perfect, I think, honestly. Even with Cold Embrace still being a thing and Shadow's Embrace being there, I like this effect. It's not strong enough to be in a legendary, I don't feel. It feels like a tier bonus. It does. And we've seen tier bonuses taken and put in the legendaries. The triple conflict rate one, Cinders, that was a legendary from Nighthold, or a tier set from Knifehold, I believe. Very strong ability. That feels legendary. This feels more like a conduit, maybe like an early talent kind of ability, but still, the relevancy is there. And if they're trying to make some kind of change with SE, I think this is actually a pretty good direction to take it, because you're not channeling Drain's Hold to refresh Shadow's Embrace. You're channeling it just to channel. It's your filler. That's fine. You're not having to maintain some ability on the move when mechanics are coming at you. If you get a proc, great. But you still have to cast it. Rapture still has a cast time on it. This ability that would feel really good, and I think honestly help make Lock, Aflock feel better. Smooth it out a good bit. Bolton plus, single target, and really AoE. Everything. Second bonus here. This is the Bale Spider set from tier 12. So casting a Shadow Bolt, Incinerate, Soulfire, and Drain Soul has a 5% chance to increase all shadow and fire damage you deal by 20% for 8 seconds. Once again, this probably needs, I mean, honestly, a 5% chance is not really a crazy amount, but at the same time, a 20% increase to your shadow and fire damage for 8 seconds is pretty strong. That covers both Affliction, covers Destro, and I mean, well, doesn't really cover Demo, but they can probably tweak this a little bit. The thing here, I half wonder if this is too close to Demonic Synergy. This is too strong for a conduit unless they drastically nerf the actual effect. But I think having the RNG of a 20% damage proc, look at Synergy. RNG. I don't know if I really want it around. It could be a cool thing. It might be too close to Synergy, but I think the effect is strong enough to probably be on a legendary. It's strong enough, and it covers all your fillers: Shadow Bolt, Incinerate, Soulfire, Keck, and Drain Soul. The tier 16 tier bonus. Conflict rate critical strikes have a 20% chance to increase the crit strike chance of Immolate and Incinerate by 10. Unstable Affliction critical hits have a 50% chance to increase all damage effects of Drain Soul by 15%. Soulfire has a 20% chance to increase you and your pet's damage by 20. Now, the Soulfire bonus there was due to Demonology. You have Conflict rate for Destro, UA for Aff, and Soulfire for Demo. They probably have to change that to Demon Bolt, I would assume. This effect is here. The thing that scares me with this is the Drain Soul modifier. Now, it's not much. 15% is not a whole lot. Blizzard's made it pretty clear they don't like Drain Soul having stacking damage effects. You already have Malefic Wrath. You already have technically Necrolord Decimating Bolt. You already have the raw damage of Drain Soul and Execute range. There's a lot of abilities. It feels sort of like Malefic Wrath for Affliction, and it feels sort of like Synergy for Demo. But the conflict rate crit chance for UA and for Incinerate and Immolate is actually strong. It's a pretty solid synergy with Roaring Blaze too. I can see this being a thing, and it sort of feels strong enough to be legendary. The biggest problem is fitting this whole paragraph of text on a piece of gear, being honest. The tier 20 bonus, this is too much Ligera stuff. Diabolic Raiment. Now, I thought about this initially being a legendary. I think it's too weak though for a legendary, and as a conduit, I think having Corruption give you a small chance to gen a shard probably is a little too strong. But at the same time, we don't have a conduit that affects Corruption directly. You have Rolling, you have Malignancy, you have Rolling, Malignancy, Cold Embrace, and Corrupting Leer. You don't have one that affects Corruption 100%. So depending on the actual like proc rate, you can see the chances 0.65 plus haste per minute. They might be able to actually make this into a conduit if they nerf the power level of it, or even keep it the same, depending how they want to tune it. But we've seen, once again, we've seen abilities pulled from old tier bonuses. Once again, Cinders, a lot of things, Madness of Azekir, the double Chaos Bolt legendary, that was also a tier bonus. Very, very strong effects, and this could potentially be one of them. I think it holds more relevancy as a conduit, not a legendary, but still, it's there. Spending a shard gives you a chance to have a haste proc. It's fine. It sort of feels like a regular bonus. Not really a big deal. For Demonology, Shadow Bolt and Demon Wrath, you can just make a Demon Bolt, have a chance to reset the cooldown of Call of Dreadstalkers. Now, this could be pretty OP, depending on how things go, because Demonic Calling doesn't have an ICD on the proc. It can proc back to back. And if you're procking this into this, playing Soul Conduit, you can actually build shards really quickly off of that if you get Soul Conduit refunds from Demonic Calling. The ability is cool though. I almost think it's strong enough to be a legendary, and probably too strong to be to be a conduit. But at the same time, if they change this to like 10%, I could see it maybe being a conduit. The problem is it's very similar to Carnivorous Stalkers, so I think it's more likely you see it on an actual legendary. And depending on Demo legendaries, it's hard to beat Wilfred's, but maybe, you know, there's a lot of synergy here. Demonic Calling, Soul Conduit, and this. Finally, Destro. This is fine. It's okay. The big one here, the fun one. Chaos Bolt always gains maximum benefit from your mastery chaotic energies. That would be spicy. You want Chaos Bolt to hit hard again? That's it. That's too strong for a conduit. And as far as legendaries are concerned, it feels a bit bland almost, but I don't think it would be. It would probably shift Destro's stat weights around a good bit, because full mastery chaotic energies gain would be a lot. But also keep in mind that the stat DR window is the thing now, and it wasn't a thing in Tomb of Sargeras. So we'd have to see how this played out. But I could quite easily see this being a legendary that comes up at 9.1 for Destro. And depending on how things shake out, I mean, it very well might end up being your best choice. You have Cinders in single target and 2 target, but depending how much it affects it, hey, I am so down for Chaos Bolt hitting like a truck again, and not a wet noodle. Now, in the end, I have no idea if any of these Azerite traits, artifact abilities, legendaries, or tier bonuses are going to make it into game in the 9.1. But just straight up looking at what we recapped, you can see that Blizzard's drawn a lot of their ideas from legendaries, from Legion, from everything we just talked about. I'd love to see Lord of Flames 4 Infernals back. It feels like Reign of Chaos, but an even bigger one, and it's very synergistic with Reign of Chaos. Flashpoint, Rolling Havoc, dude, I mean, as much as they got old in Nilotha, it would make a big difference for Destro at this point, especially heading into an unknown raid tier, improving his toolkit even further. Destro can very well be a thing. Soul Flame, listen, everybody loves Soul Flame. I'm down to have it back. And the compounding horror thing could actually be a thing too. Plus the random shard gen we talked about with conduits and things. I'm down for that. Demonology, the expendables, we'll see. Demo's in a weird spot because most of the abilities we talked about, like from its weapon, they're not as relevant anymore because it doesn't have demonic empowerment or Thalki on it anymore. The actual Azerite traits, most of them are in game now. But I do think that having a recurrent ritual around, or the generic Soul of Netherlord legendary, depending which one like talent it gave you, could really help Demonology out even more. But you know, I guess we'll see in 9.1 how much help Demonology actually needs. Hint, I don't think it's going to be much. Either way, let me know what you guys think of this video and the suggestions, everything in the comment section below. I'll be sure to get back to you. Any questions, also feel free to drop them down there. Any Week Wars profiles or add-ons, feel free to swing by my Twitch where you can grab them for free, hang out, ask any questions, feel free to discuss this video at the same time, anytime. Thanks again for watching, dudes, and I will catch you all again soon on stream. Peace.